Hi, this is Carl. This is part 2 of the discussion about some of the flaws which pervade GCSE and A Level language courses. I mentioned in part 1 that one of the major problems in teaching to GCSE pupils in the mainstream sector was the result of there being too many individuals within a classroom learning situation, each of whom has their own learning preferences, and therefore in order to tailor the pupil to the classroom situation, we need the teacher to offer a particular amount of individual contact time to each of those pupils in order for each individual to get the best out of the learning situation. That arguably implies that the amount of individual contact time between teacher and individual student is reduced. Another problem which I mentioned was the fact that grammatical explanations are often far too complicated. The teacher doesn't know really how to simplify them, and they're taken in isolation without being integrated with other areas of learning, such as the development of oral linguistic proficiency or the development of skills where topic-based learning is concerned. I also mentioned that there was far too much emphasis on reading skills, on writing skills, and not enough focus on the development of oral linguistic proficiency. And one of the arguments which I put forward, and I can fairly say that this works for me as a self-studying polyglot of a number of different languages, that if first and foremost you can get the motivation and the determination to improve your oral linguistic proficiency, then on a secondary level you can actually support that oral linguistic proficiency by plugging into it an understanding of the grammatical components of the language and also maybe even topic-based learning. But it's arguably important that as soon as we can get our oral linguistic proficiency up to speed, we can become fluent through our build-up of individual elements of vocabulary. We can string sentences together. If we trust ourselves to actually speak a language, even if we can only say certain sentences with particular grammatical structures, then this helps us to build our confidence, and it gives us the knowledge that from the outset we do have that ability to speak without hesitating. What we need to do is, if we do get things wrong, is not to worry about it, because in order to improve our vocabulary, in order to improve our linguistic proficiency, we have to rely on a greater understanding of a range of different linguistic structures, and we have to give ourselves a reminder that the learning of vocabulary, while it may appear to be one of the most complicated and most difficult areas of language learning, is to find ways to remember that vocabulary. And if we integrate isolated nouns, for example, into the sentences for which we have a knowledge of the grammatical structures, then that will help us perhaps to remember the individual nouns in question. Now, going back to the discussion about GCSE and A Level, we can actually pinpoint a number of problems which apply to both types of courses. Too much emphasis on reading skills, too much emphasis on writing, and not enough emphasis on the development of oral skills. Too much focus on difficult explanations of language grammar which fail to be simplified, which are then taken in isolation, and which are given too much priority, instead of being integrated with other areas of learning on a more subconscious level. As I've just said, if you can get your spoken skills up to scratch, or you can find a teacher who has the ability, as linguagenesis tutors do, to get that oral linguistic proficiency up to standard, then you will find it much easier, provided that you can give yourself the confidence that you are self-confident and determined that you will be able to understand an aspect of language grammar, and that you give yourself the freedom to convince yourself that you will be able to speak the language, and that if you do make mistakes, then those can easily be rectified by reiterating your understanding of a particular aspect of the one foreign language, then you will arguably progress much further and much more quickly than so many of us are doing currently, both in the mainstream sector and also in the further and adult education sector. If we look at A-level courses, we find, as with GCSE courses, that there is too much emphasis on topic-based learning. But in addition to that, many of the areas in question aren't of particular interest to your average teenager. For example, global issues, the development of science and communication technologies, politics, World War II. Too much emphasis on the learning of in-depth and very subject-specific vocabulary, but once again, too much complicated explanations about the language grammar and not enough integration between simplified explanations of language grammar and the development of oral linguistic proficiency. Less of a problem perhaps as far as the number of enrolled students is concerned, because at GCSE you might have 30 people in a class, and at A-level on average you might have between 6 and 10, let's say, individuals in a classroom situation. So you have a better idea as a teacher as to what the learner types and the learner preferences of your individual students are, and therefore the overall learning experience is much more satisfying, and provided that you make the best use of your skills as a teacher and you undertake research and do continued professional development in order to better yourself as a linguist, then your students will go a lot further in a shorter amount of time. But as I say, we need to develop oral linguistic proficiency, and into that we need to plug a simplified understanding of the language grammar, and also we need to be focusing much more on the types of vocabulary which apply to general areas of conversation than would apply to very subject-specific areas, many of which at A-level, as I say, aren't really of particular interest to the average 17 or 18-year-old.